Yeah, I mean, I think, asking if they suck, it's an RPG, right? So you got to define your goals. And, the camera's just turned off.
Sorry, we're good.
No, you're good. You got to figure out what your goals are, right? And so if your goals are, like Moot said, to top the most number of fights on meters, then, they're not as ideal for that. But every melee serves, a really good function in this game, right? So if you care at all about PvP, rogues are incredible. I mean, they probably have, the most number of high-end viable team comps. They're super high skill ceiling. You can be good at a rogue, and the difference between, a good rogue and a great rogue is still night and day, right? There's so much room for really incredible plays that rogues can do when it comes to PvPing. And they're really high skill cap, and they're really challenging and fun and versatile. So, yeah, I think, there's still a lot of room for that. Whereas something like a warrior or a feral druid or enhancement shaman, they can all fulfill multiple roles. Right? A warrior and a druid can tank, and enhancement shaman is still providing raid utility. So if your goal is to just be the number one DPS, maybe you're not as happy in that. But if you want to still you can still crush it, right? You can still come prepared, do really well, provide raid utility, and then go and play some PvP. So it just depends what you want to do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, it depends how hardcore your guild is and what your goals of yourself and your guild are. Like Crix is saying, he plays in very hardcore guilds where everyone's min-maxing. There's a good chance that not everyone is going to be playing in super hardcore guilds. But, if you want to play warrior or rogue or enhance or whatever it is, and you're simply just putting in more effort than other people in your guild are willing to, you will be able to out-DPS them.
That's a really good point. What the same sort of thing applies to TBC as it does with Classic, and this makes sense. At least in Classic, people say you have to play a warrior, you have to get every world buff. This is the absolute expectation. If you're not doing that, you're trolling or something. As someone like myself, I never really raided in an extremely hardcore raid environment. I was always kind of in that semi-hardcore range. And for me, regardless of what class you played, you wouldn't have to get all world buffs or whatever. But if you just have some pretty good game sense and you are knowing when to, pop certain coolies and have a decent head on your shoulders, you can perform and top DPS. I was top DPSing as a warlock, MC, BWL, so on and so forth. So it might be that type of thing you're saying in TBC. If you're a really good player and you're not in the most hardcore guild, you can absolutely shine as melee possibly.
Yeah, especially if you're min-maxing.
Yeah.
You have good buffs you'd want, right? You still want a warrior in your hunter group for battle shout and stuff, so you can't totally neglect it either.
True.
Yeah, the one arms in there.
Even more so than that too, though. They actually have some mandatory raid utility too, the least Arms Warrior does, right? I don't know if Rogue does, but Arms Warrior has the 4%, right? So.
I mean, I wouldn't say mandatory, but you can use the excuse that you need to bring a rogue or a melee for that one. For that, I would say Enhance has a mandatory buff, but I don't say that 4% physical damage isn't mandatory.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends.
It's not going to be that hard either. I don't think it's going to be absolute 8 arms.
Well, it's raid wide though, whereas the Enhance I think is only group wide. Am I wrong on that?
You're right about that, yeah, because it's a debuff that goes on the buff. Blood Frenzy, 4% increase melee damage. But I mean, yeah, it depends on your raid comp, and it depends how much you're going to value that. How many hunters are you running? How much do you value the 4% damage maybe for your tank, for threat? And also, how much damage is the Arms Warrior going to be able to do on this fight? There are some fights where, for progression, the Arms Warrior is pretty much just going to be dead weight.
Okay. So let's try to take a few steps back. It's a hard topic to answer, right? Because there's so many things to consider. But what specializations immediately come to mind when you think of melee in TBC? What are you considering as melee? I know it seems basic, but let's all get on the same page together. Just shout them out.
Arms, Enhance, Ret, Rogue, Feral.
Yeah, that.
Did we miss
Ret,
yeah.
Right.
So, sorry, forgot.
So Retribution Pally. We're not considering Prot as a melee, right? That's a meme.
No, I mean tanks are, right?
Yeah, exactly. Feral Druid. Are you considered enhanced melee? I guess, right? Enhanced melee.
And Fury as well, but Fury doesn't bring anything except for just damage. Just minor damage at that. In the beginning.
So Fury and Arms, you considering both specs viable, melee DPS?
I would say arms more because they bring the buff. I'm not bringing a Fury. If I'm min maxing to
A furry?
when TBC Classic comes out, I'm not bringing a Fury.
What do you have against furries, Crix?
All right,
Fury
so,
Warriors. I'm not bringing a Fury Warrior. I'll bring an Arms Warrior for obvious reasons, but I'm not going to bring a Fury Warrior.
and is it just because the Fury doesn't have that 4% utility? Is the damage?
Yeah, they don't have the buff. Both Arms and Fury are minute damage in T4, so why bring the one that doesn't have the buff versus the one that does have the buff?
Okay.
Is
Moot, any
their
thoughts
damage
on
pretty
this?
similar?
Maybe it depends on different tiers too. That's another question we'll answer in a second here. How melee do throughout the life cycle of a TBC Super Bid. Anyway, Moot, sorry, what you were saying? Fury versus Arms.
Right, yeah. I mean, people typically say that, tier 4 and tier 5 at the beginning, melee is a lot weaker, and this definitely makes sense because warriors, especially, I think, scale with gear stronger than any other class, and also expertise, which we're going to get more in depth on later. At the start of content, expertise is pretty difficult to get, and a lot of the items that have expertise aren't even really worth using all the time. But later on, when you start getting, into Black Temple and Hyjal and whatever, the gear has a lot more expertise and other really good stats, and I think that's a big reason why, warriors scale and start doing better. But yeah, Fury, I mean, I'm the warrior guy. I like warrior. I do think that Fury can work, especially because they can transition to off-tanking pretty easily while staying in that spec. It just has to be, a really good player, like really min-maxing. And I do think in Classic TBC, we're going to see a lot more people playing Fury Warrior because, they're just stubborn and they want to play Fury. That's not going to be in a hardcore guild necessarily, but I do think just the sheer amount of warriors from Classic will carry over to TBC, and you will see more Fury Warriors in Classic TBC raids.
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack here, right? So, is Warrior in Classic, right? That's a question for the chat too. Is Warriors the most popular class right now? Like, is it the highest percentage? I feel like it was at one point. I don't know if it still is, if things have shifted, or if they're still doing that data. But there's a ton of people playing Warriors. I think some of the people that have that PvE mindset, they love raiding. They are passionate about optimization. They're passionate about pushing their raid to the limit, speed running. There's a lot of warriors, a lot of melee in Classic. So moving into TBC, you're going to have this huge amount of people playing warriors and rogues, and maybe not so many spaces. But the other aspect to unpack is that TBC Classic might be significantly easier than on the private servers. It almost certainly will be. And the other thing to think about is maybe private servers don't have it all figured out. Is there any possibility with that too? Maybe, what we know about Classic and everybody playing these melee classes and knowing so much about itemization now might actually shift the meta as well. A lot to unpack there, but we can chip away at it. Anybody have some initial points?
Yeah, I think the hit thing that was discovered with Warriors was not discovered on a private server. That was discovered with Classic. So
The Heroic Strike queuing?
The Heroic Strike queuing, exactly, where, you could have Heroic Strike ready to go for your main hand, and your offhand got all the benefits of the hit, because normally there was a large penalty on your offhand, right? And as long as you had Heroic Strike queued, it just skipped that penalty. So if you were low on rage, you could queue it up, cancel, and re-queue. Whereas if you had enough rage, you could basically just spam Heroic Strike to always be getting that maxed out offhand hit. And that took Warriors from, which people already knew they were the number one, to ridiculous heights where they were hitting, the numbers we only saw in AQ40 and Nax all the way in Molten Core. And then combined with the fact that you can pull rage, with that you've got Cleave and Whirlwind for packs, and they were just kings of speed clearing and single target. I think that'll translate, though, to answer, in TBC. I think there will be new discoveries. I think people will figure out how to pump. I still think, these min-maxy strategies of, pulling rage and maybe larger pulls than we did in TBC could benefit things like melee DPS, which don't have mana, but also have, built-in ways to do, lots of AoE damage. I don't know. We'll see. I think Warriors will do better than initially thought. And maybe Rogues, too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they'll do better in the aspect that the fights are shorter, but I think they're still going to be behind everywhere else. I don't think the meta is going to change with melee coming into Classic TBC.
And why is that? And I have a thought on that as well. But why? Try to delve down to why does melee get air quotes shut down in TBC, or why are they significantly impacted in a negative way?
Oh, I don't know. I don't play Melee. I just know that they don't seem to be doing that good. I don't know enough about Melee to know why they're not good. I just for what I ask around, you know what I mean? That's why they seem to do fine in T4, and then they kind of just fall off, man. I don't know enough about Melee to speak on that. I just don't think that they're going to be. What would change in the meta that's going to make them want to be in the meta? Like,
I'll chime in with one obvious thing: world buffs and lack thereof. Right? There's really not. I guess people on the TBC private servers, they're finding ways to bring world buffs in. I don't know. I've been hearing rumblings of that, but for the most part, I mean, Melee scale ridiculously well with some of these world buffs that you pick up in Classic, and in TBC, they're not going to have access to some of those big ticket world buffs, correct? So there's that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. I didn't even think of that.
How do you feel about all this, Mood? There's a lot here, man. There's information overload.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question, and we're not really sure about world buffs in TBC at this point. I mean, I really hope that they're not in TBC. I don't think that they should be really a part of the TBC experience, even though I do play Melee, and they help Melee a lot. But I think it's simply, the mechanics in TBC are a lot more intensive than mechanics in Classic. A lot of the time, you straight up just can't hit the boss if you're a melee DPS. I mean, there are so many fights where that happens, right? Like Lurker, Leothras, Lady Vash, everyone is moving around. There are so many moving parts. I mean, on certain servers right now, there literally is 360 cleave mechanics, which I really don't understand what the point of having a 360 cleave mechanic in the game is. It's literally just there to screw Melee over. So, I mean, just moving from Classic to TBC, there are a lot of reasons why Melee gets a lot worse. I mean, you simply can't hit the boss, and you have to play around mechanics that range DPS simply do not have to even deal with a lot of the time.
I think world buffs stopped working, or at least like the Ani head stopped working on players above a certain level in TBC, so it wasn't a thing.
That might
There
be
was still Darkmoon Fair, but
yeah, because Lord Spaghetti is saying that world buffs are still available till Black Temple, but I think they nerfed them, right?
He's mistaken. No, I think they don't work on high levels.
They're available, but you can't be above level 63.
Gotcha. There it is. I mean, guys, good news or bad news? No world buffs in rating. How do you guys feel about that? Probably overwhelmingly, people feel very excited about that. There's other cool things too, like flasks are way cheaper, as you guys are saying, and all that type of stuff. So
honestly, you're better off not even using a flask. Like most of the time, you're better off using the double elixir combo. The flask just saves money if you're dying a lot, but if you're not, then it's like you don't even need flasks, so it's way cheaper. You don't have to raid log world buffs. It's so much better.
Gotcha. Okay, what else do we chip away at? Melee just bad. So short answer, yes. Long answer, no. Maybe we can focus for a second on things that you can look forward to if you do want to play a Melee in TBC. Like I've heard, for example, Arms Warriors for some reason. People love the playstyle of Arms Warrior in TBC. Like they make compilations of it. It's almost like this underdog spec that people really seem to latch onto for some unknown reason. I've never really rated as an Arms Warrior or anything like that. Maybe if you have any insight into that, Moot or Swifty, are you excited to play Feral? What is there to look forward to if you're a Melee?
You go ahead, Moot.
All right, yeah. I can say Arms Warrior I play on Karazhan right now, and it is very, very fun. I mean, you get a gigantic two-hander, and you're just absolutely blasting. Sometimes it's not fun when you're just dead on the floor, and you look at all the ranged DPS that don't even have to dodge the mechanic that you have to play around. But there's a lot of things about it that are just very, very satisfying. As Arms, you play, two-hand sword spec, so you have sword specialization and Wind Fury. So a lot of the times, if you get a gigantic proc, it honestly just feels like you're popping off. The rotation is actually really fun and, takes a lot of skill, and it's a decent amount of buttons to press, in my opinion. That's kind of why I gravitate towards melee classes. That's one of the reasons, in TBC, rotationally, I feel that the warrior rotation is one of the most fun rotations in the game. And, on certain servers right now, hunters can actually play with a macro that essentially plays the game for them by pressing one button. and that just doesn't seem fun to me. Even if you're topping meters, that just does not seem fun to me.
I think there's a good point. Sorry, Shrifty, I don't mean to cut you off, but one thing I will say is like, so I played a Warlock going into Classic, and there is something about being the underdog versus being the one that's expected to pump or the one who's expected to win or whatever. And like in a Warlock in PvP, you'd be expected to like win every altercation or whatever. Like, I do really see a lot of appeal in playing like an underdog kind of class, and maybe like Melee could. There could be something there with Melee, right? Like when people don't expect you to be at the top of the meters, and you're at the top of the meters or close to it, that feels amazing, right? So there's that. But what is the rotation of arms? That, like, generally speaking, I know there's probably a lot of nuance to it, but
Smash your face, Birdie.
Yeah. Yeah, man. No, I totally agree with that though, Cargons. What you just said, like. If people don't expect to get beaten in DPS by a warrior, and then you do end up beating them, it makes it that much sweeter. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, and yeah, the arms warrior rotation, yeah, for sure, we can talk about that. Basically, Slam, there is a talent in the Fury tree called Improve Slam. With 2 points, it reduces the casting time of Slam by 1 second, and Slam is basically your bread and butter. The basic rotation is auto attack, and right as soon as your auto attack is over, right after your auto attack lands, you're going to slam, and then you're going to Mortal Strike. You're going to auto attack again, slam, and then you're going to whirlwind, and then your Mortal Strike will be off cooldown again.
Aha, slam, ability not used like ever in Classic. That's pretty cool. And interestingly, there's no sweeping strikes too, huh? In arms, I realized. Yeah, that's a Fury thing, so...
Yep, Sweeping Strikes is in the Fury tree, but you do get Sweeping Strikes as PvE arms spec, so, it also feels incredible just, cleaving 2 mobs, putting up Sweeping Strikes, Slam. Your AoE rotation is going to be pretty similar, except you're going to prioritize Whirlwind over Mortal Strike in that case. Slam is really good with Sweeping Strikes, though. It'll hit 2 targets. And yeah, it's just a really satisfying rotation that honestly does take a lot of skill just with the timing window of when you slam, because you want to slam as close as you can to after when your auto attack lands, right? So, I mean, you can get closer and closer and more precise with that.
I would imagine that kind of makes it hard on moving fights, right? Don't you have to cast slam? It's like 2 seconds. Like, if you have to move around, does that really screw you over as a arms warrior?
Yeah, it does, but the casting time is pretty short, so...
I think the movement...
You just have to play around it.
No, I think the movement in fights is one of the reasons why Melee is worse, right? Because Melee wants to be behind the target to get around parrying, and if the target moves a lot, or if the area is not safe to stand in, then Melee is going to have to move around and lose DPS, whereas Hunters and Warlocks mages can just sit there. So I think that's actually one of the big reasons why Melee is behind in terms of numbers. It's not like their class just can't pump it, it's the fights are a lot more challenging for Melee. And that's another reason why Expertise is so good, because that lowers the enemy's chance to parry and dodge. So, for tanks it's awesome because they're always in front of the target. But for Melee DPS, getting rid of the dodge alone is a huge advantage, but with enough Expertise, you don't even always have to stand behind. But, yeah. Let me know when you're ready for Druid stuff, though, for Feral.
Yeah, we're going to be getting into the two. Guys, this is also, like, an opportunity just to ask whatever you want to ask to, like a warrior enthusiast, a druid enthusiast, a warlock enthusiast, guys. So what the hell? Like, it's not that serious. If you have really good questions or something that you're dying to know about TBC, either tweet at us or you can throw them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them. Here's a question. Let's say somebody is really into raiding. That's their thing, and right now they're playing a warrior. Would you advise them? Would you advise them to reroll, or or what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm telling them reroll.
What are their goals, Cargos? Like, what do they want to do?
So they're okay. This is This is Joe Schmo, and he loves theory crafting, optimization, itemization. Speed running.
Speed running raids, or does Joe
speed running raids?
Heroics.
Yeah, speed running raids. Just loves it. Like raid night, best night.
Does he like to PvP, Mr. Schmo?
Joe Schmo.
No. He's a raider, man. He's a
Oh, he doesn't like
hardcore raider. Raid 4 or 5 times a week.
And what
And
class?
he's warrior.
And he's playing a warrior or a rogue, or like a melee. He's playing. He's
Joe Schmo.
Joe
Won't
Schmo.
pull as much DPS as Jane Schmo on the fucking mage will or the warlock will. That's the issue. I don't care how min maxy you are. That's cool. I like it, bud. But I already have my 1 or 2 warriors. You need to reroll to something that we need. It's gonna triple the damage.
Yeah.
The thing is,
Joe,
yeah, we get it. It sucks that you like melee. We get it. It sucks, but like, there's classes that double, triple your damage. So like, hey, sorry about it.
Damn, dude. But okay.
Yeah,
I'm also a
fair.
scumbag. I'm a min max. I'm one of those weird meta dudes. So
Oh, you're keeping it real though, Crix. You're keeping it 100. It's better than you just lying here, dude. That's you. You're a hardcore raider. You do this shit. You live this shit, man. Like that's. I love how you just go for it and you just say it, man. Sorry, what were you saying, Moot? Sorry.
No, I mean, I totally agree with what you guys are saying and what Crix is saying. And, you know, I think there's two sides to the story. Like, the question is, you play Warrior now, should you reroll? It really depends what you're looking for and what you're going for. If you always want to see yourself on the top of the meter with kind of minimal effort, you want to guarantee that spot on, like, pretty much every fight, yes, you should definitely reroll. Like, do you not have a spot kind of already lined up for yourself in a guild? Yes, you probably should reroll, but I think you also have to ask yourself, like, how much do you like playing your current class? Like, is that the class that you really want to play? Like, are you willing to make it work? Are you willing to put in the extra effort? Are you willing to, you know, be benched and maybe guild hop a few times to try to get a spot? Like, I really think there's two sides to the argument here, you know, like, and it all depends on the person. Like, if you played Classic and the only reason you played Warrior is so you could be top DPS, then just drop the class and, you know, pick the next class.
The next
and
flavor.
With
the next flavor of the X pack.
70% of the fucking warriors in Classic.
Yeah, probably a lot of people will do that. And, you know, I can't blame them. I cannot blame someone for picking the best class in an expansion. Like, if that's what you want, by all means go for it. But, you know, if you really love Warrior, you really love Rogue, or for some reason you really love Enhancement Shaman, or, you know, Feral Druid, like, I would go, like, I would stick with your class personally, because you, like, if you know that you are the best at your class and you're willing to put in the extra effort, I do think you'll outperform someone who isn't doing that, even if they are playing a better class.
I mean, as far as the other ones go, the Enhance and the Feral, like, you can justify a raid spot just because of utility you bring, right? Like, Shamans are amazing. You got Bloodlust, you got all your totems for your group, you got damage. So as long as you still have to put the work in as Enhance to, like, still do decent damage, but you don't need to win because you're providing so much damage to your group that as long as you do okay damage, like, you're more than useful. Ferals, like, you don't provide as much damage as an Enhancement Shaman would, but 5% crit, melee and ranged, your hunters are going to love that. They're going to want you in your group. And when you need an extra tank, the Feral spec is almost identical for the DPS and the tanking. It's very slightly different, but close enough that you can do both roles with one spec excellently. Even a lot of the gear is shared, so you can either swap a few pieces around, but you can pump. Like, no other tank in TBC is also just going to pump damage like a Feral. So, you know, huge advantage. You can tank groups when, you know, people always want tanks. So there's a lot of reasons to play Druid.
Well, how did Feral do? Like, yeah, that's great point, Swifty. Great point. It's kind of like the same case in Classic too. Like, there's also just a gear thing. You distribute gear a little bit easier if you have a Druid there too, right? And the Druid can fill so many roles, and I hear they do great. You know, like pretty solid damage. I mean,
there's a huge power spike at 2-piece tier 4, which is, you know, something you get really early. 2-piece tier 4, you can get that, you know, out of Karzhan or Gruul or whatever. Yeah, and that's a huge spike. So they actually, I think their damage is good. I think it's really just limited by how much you have to move in a fight, because Feral Druids are like dagger rogues in the sense that all of their damage comes from behind, right? They have to shred spam, and that you have to be behind the target. So in any fight where you can't be behind the target for even a little bit of time, every time you can't be behind the target, you're going to drop off even more than normal. So that's a huge penalty on fights like that. But fights where you can sit behind the target, you can pump. And as far as fun goes, they have the most, bar none, complicated rotation. So if that appeals to you, I can tell you why. But
Oh, is it power
not.
shifting still? Is it more of the same?
Oh, it's
classic?
power shifting to the extreme. So, for those that you don't know what power shifting is, essentially, as a druid, you have a talent that gives you 40 energy every time you go into cat form. Then you can and should wear a helmet called Wolf's Head Helmet that gives you another 20 energy when you
Wolf's
shift
Head.
into cat form. So you get 60 energy when you shift into cat form. Then you'll use some sort of add-on to track your energy bar ticker. If you played a rogue or a druid, you're probably already doing this. And you shift into cat form right before the energy tick. So you have 80 energy. Then you shred once. So that puts you on global cooldown. But global cooldowns in cat form are only a second instead of a second and a half. But anyway, you shred once. You wait for the energy tick. You shred again. You're on global cooldown. You shift out and back into cat form right before the next energy tick. So that way you go back to 80. And this is your standard rotation in vanilla. In TBC, this is amped up because now you also have Mangle. Mangle applies 12 seconds where your shreds do more damage, and it also makes everyone that does bleeding damage in the raid do more, so that also can help your melee teams like warriors and rogues. Except there's also this special extra crack version of it, where there's a bug in TBC, and this should exist even in the new classic TBC. Kind of like the warrior heroic strike hit, where it's like, they just said it's not a bug, even though we all know it was. Where swipe, which is, rip, the bleeding finisher that cats will do, okay? This does 30% more damage if Mangle is applied. But if you do it right at the end of the Mangle duration, it actually has a travel time. So even though this is a melee attack, it's not actually instant. You literally have to swipe right in the last framing, the batching window, okay, of the Mangle falling off. So that way, when you cast the rip, the Mangle's still there, but when it hits, the Mangle is gone, okay? This will give the rip the extra 30% damage. Then you Mangle again right after, and it stacks that and gives another 30%. And it's additive, and it does way more damage. So you literally have to like batch your combos while power shifting. Now you get the 2-piece tier 4, right? Which gives you a chance on hit to get 20 energy back. So this totally messes with when you shift.
Or you can spam your one-button macro as Hunter, yo. It sounds like the good life.
It's hard as fuck if to do it optimally. And even if you're a pro, you're probably not going to do it optimally.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's definitely engaging. I mean, doing all that while also like watching mechanics and moving, it's fucking insane.
What about Pharaohs in your raids, Mood or Crix? Do you guys see Pharaohs, and how do they do? Like, is there like a dedicated cat druid sometimes?
There's a dedicated Pharaoh, but it's a tank, and that's all I need to say. But I will say, I know we're talking about PvE, and we haven't talked about PvP side, but I'll say Pharaoh's amazing at PvP. I like it. They're annoying.
Really?
But raiding, I haven't seen a cat raid yet.
Well, does your bear not go cat when you don't need him to tank, or is he a main tank?
To be honest, I don't pay attention enough to know if he's doing that. He's the off tank. He's the main off tank. So I don't know if I don't think I've ever seen him go cat, but at the same time, I never paid attention to see if he was going cat, if that makes sense.
It's probably the difference between like second tank versus third tank role, where the third tank can DPS a lot more than the second tank kind of situation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yo, we were learning last week, Shrifty, that, and sorry, as a quick aside, I just know this would get you excited, bro. That druid has, I think they said, the best single target threat out of all the tanks. And then in Sunwell, they're like God mode, and they go like 80% dodge. You can't hit them.
They were kind of like that in Classic already. I mean, I would, always get into these big deck matchups. I mean, there were certain warriors that knew, how to Fury. Like, they were literally, the Fury tanks could compete maybe in threat, and once they had Thunder Fury, I'm sure. But yeah, in TBC, they're the kings of the single target threat. Okay. And they're still solid at AoE. But
so I have a question too. So Classic is going to be maybe 2.5 times easier than these private server values, maybe allegedly, and we saw this. There's a precedent here with like the vanilla private servers versus how it ended up being in Classic. Do you think it's going to be a little bit less min-maxy come real TBC Classic? And if so, how many slots do you think there's going to be for like warriors, rogues, melee on progression and stuff like this? Try to like have an open mind here, going into the first couple raids here. Do you think like in reality, if you had to guess, most raids aren't super hardcore. Like, are you still talking there's going to be a few spots here, or what do you think?
I feel like people are still going to be min-maxy, just like they're in Classic. That meta of people min-maxing and flavor of the month and stuff is not going to change.
Yeah.
None of that's going to change. It's going to keep going. That's the life of WoW. That's not a Classic thing. That's a retail thing. That's a Legion thing. That's a Battle for Azeroth. That's a WoD. Everyone does that. It's not going to change. It's the same way. Unless something happens. Unless something, how like Classic came out and people found some like stuff that was different than private servers and this ended up being better than this. Unless something happens that we're not aware of, no. I'm not benching a warlock for, or a hunter for another warrior or a rogue or enhancement shaman, which we haven't talked about, or a repouty, which we haven't talked about.
Okay. What do you think, Moose?
Yeah, I agree. But I do it's not going to be a full-on meta shift to all of a sudden like we're melee stacking. Like, hunters and warlocks are still going to be top, but I think the spots will open up for melee more because the content's going to be easier. Probably the bosses will have less health. Some of the mechanics will be more forgiving. Like I said, it's not going to be a full-on meta shift, and it's going to depend on what boss you're on, and if your guild is going to be subbing out different people for different comps, and
I mean, honestly, right, it's always the player. It's like, if you're in the most hardcore
Sure.
of hardcore guilds, you can assume that everyone's doing everything right, so you'll bring the most optimal. But usually, like, that guy is just better than, another 5 DPSer. So even if they're supposed to, how it was in most of the raiding guilds, right? The people that try hard enough and are very good are going to beat the expectated.
But maybe it's so far different though, Swifty, because I feel like that way in Classic. Honestly, I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but like if I put me on any class, like, and you just go into a random semi-hardcore raid or something like that, and you come, to party, and you might pay for a PI or two or something. You do what you got to do. Like you'll be able to be up there, like top 5
Totally.
or something like that. You
Totally.
think, but maybe it's that far from hunters, and warlocks. Maybe like.
It's far. And another thing is, a lot of these fights, if you think of like Olar, you can't be a melee in that fight. That's rough as fuck. You can, but you're not doing anything.
it's true. The
I
boss
mean,
is
Solarian,
literally-
your rip is a melee.
You actually can't do anything.
KT,
Right?
you need to have a couple people on KT. You need to have a couple melee for Vag to handle the Tainted Course and shit like that. But you don't. I mean, that's it. It's too hard for. It's not just like the mechanics say how Swifty was saying you have to be behind a boss. It's the fact that you have to move out of a mechanic, which is easy for you to do, but the time it takes for you to move back and forth 5 times a fight versus me just moving as a caster 2 feet over and continue casting, and then 2 feet and then continue casting. You got to run over and over again, which is just losing so much more damage overall in the raid.
Sure. You can always instant while you're moving, too.
Yeah.
I see.
It's true, and if it's supposed to be like a one-shot mechanic, I doubt it's going to be so undertuned that like melee in classic TBC will suddenly be able to just stand in the mechanic or something like that.
Yeah, which could be a possibility. Really, I didn't think about that.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. What about Enhancement Shaman? Is there Enhancement Shaman in your raid, Crix or Mood? Like, do you
There's always one in the raid.
always want?
For sure.
I think I could be wrong, but what I see from my melee, consistently over the past like 9 months of raiding on this on Endless was our Enhancement Shaman was the best melee that we had. But we also never ran a rogue until T6. You know what I mean? We didn't run a warrior that much, but when we did, you always see the Enhance is the one that's the meme one supposedly, but that's the one I see above the Ret Paladin, above the rogue, above everything else.
Damn, you see the Enhance above the red?
Yeah, but also we didn't run a rogue. Yes, above the ret, and it could just be I don't know anything about ret or enhancement shaman. It could be how they're spec'd or anything. But pretty much everybody in the guild is min maxing. So from what I'm seeing, is enhances. I like enhance.
So Enhance kind of pumps then?
A little bit, yeah. They're not. I mean, it's still melee. Don't get me fucked up, but it's nice. I like them. I like them better than you know.
I mean, if they totem twist, you're talking about giving your whole group like
Yeah,
500.
they have the biggest
power,
buffs.
4 or 5% crit, and wind fury.
Yo, Crix just refers. It's like they're so like you just reviewed him. You talk about melee in such a funny way as a warlock.
Well, I'm a caster, baby. I don't care if I'm pressing one button the whole time. We're pumping.
Oh, I love it, man. That's hilarious. Okay.
It's true though, man, and yeah, like enhance. I mean, shaman is just like the epitome of a useful class. Like
Right.
if you're talking about classes that are useful, shaman is always going to be useful. There's so many different totems they can use, and a good enhancement shaman is for sure totem twisting. So that means
Right.
Yeah.
giving Wind Fury and Agi totem, and they have enough globals to do that. Like LA Shamans are pretty much never going to totem twist because they're constantly casting, but Enhanced Shaman has free globals, and to min-max that class, they better be totem twisting, and that really does help. What I think we're going to see in TBC Classic most likely is kind of 2 melee groups, like group 1 for the main tanks, and then maybe there's going to be 1 melee that kind of sneaks in there, and I kind of think that we are going to see another group with possibly 1 Enhanced Shaman in the tank group and 1 Enhanced Shaman in a second melee group. Like, it's not going to go to full-on just melee zug cleave, but I think it is somewhat likely that we'll see 2 melee groups be meta.
Well,
I don't like that.
It's like you said, though, only Enhancement Shaman is really in a good position to twist, and they should, right? And who benefits the most from twisting is a Hunter, because they don't benefit from the Wind Fury, they want the Grace of Air. So, it would make sense to throw a couple Hunters in with your Enhance, with your Feral, and just give them all these buffs. Your top pumping Hunters can pump that much harder. And it hits their pets, too. Like, everything affects them and their pets.
True, and enhancement looks so freaking cool, like just the spells. So wait, I think we're making progress here, guys. I actually think this is useful for people. Like, if you want to play melee, you love the ideas of big slapper purple weapons and all this. I mean, what's the most useful melee? It seems like it's enhance, like even more so than red, possibly. Or what do you guys think about that? Like, if you want to play melee, what's the most useful? The most that have the highest chance of a raid spot.
Feral tank. Are you not counting tanks?
Oh no, it could be. Yeah. So you think druid's like really useful and good?
I think it's enhance. I think enhance is nice. I don't know about running 2 melee groups, but I like enhance. Usually enhances in the tank group, and your other group is just the Feral, Arsham, 3 BM hunters. I don't know. Some people run double Ellie instead of running double enhance, and I like that better. I think Classic TBC is going to be more of running that second mage group with another enhance or whatever in there, rather than another extra melee group, due to what we've already been talking about. I could be wrong. Obviously, I don't know everything, but I just don't see what can change from the game to make him, oh my god, Warrogues are amazing. Like, no, they're not. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what can change.
I think Enhance for sure is like the safest pick. If you just want to play melee and you don't care about the class, Enhance is the safest pick from what I've seen. People love shamans, people love totems, bloodlusts. Like, you probably will get a spot as an enhanced shaman.
And how many shamans do you have in a raid? I mean, you have like at least 4.
One in every group, pretty much.
So what? Like, what do you think? Like 5 total?
I would want 5. I mean, I understand if you don't get 5, but I would want 5.
I mean, but you should get 5. I think all these people who want to play, dude, you better switch from warrior to shaman.
Like, you could.
Someone says, what class should I play to have a spot no matter what? It's shaman, bro.
Yeah,
it's true.
You will be fine.
Especially if you're willing to play any spec, like, you're just the ultimate useful class. Like, you'll always get a spot if you're a shaman and you're willing to play any spec, because all shaman specs are viable.
Yeah, you want an Ellie Shaman for your top pumping casters. Like, that's...
Melderon went off about Ellie Shaman, dude, saying that they have all the new totem they get. He's excited for Ellie Shaman. He thinks they slap.
Ellie Shaman's my favorite secret class.
It's so funny. Type something in the chat if you're rerolling Shaman from Warrior or Rogue. Probably a couple of them out there. Now you know what to play, though, right, guys? This is useful. What about Ret, though, man? Do you get excited when you see a Ret Pally, or are you just kind of like, this guy?
I mean,
how do you guys feel?
I want the blessings, so...
Real quick, Bet's asked if totem twisting is possible on long fights like Illidan. It is, but you need to have wisdom for the mana for it, or you're not going to have the mana. And what did you just ask me?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, how do you guys feel about a Ret melee DPS? Like, do you get excited? Does it excite you that they're in the raid at all? Like, do you feel like they're contributing? And do you see
more excited? Yeah. They contribute, 2% damage to the party, and they have a 3% crit to the entire raid. And then their judgment. So, like, they're needed, and I vibe with them. But in my eyes, it's a melee still. That's why you only bring 1, though,
Yeah.
But his name is Blazed, he pumps. T6, he's pumping. All of our melee are pumping. All the shit that everyone's been talking the entire life cycle, now we're at the end where they're just dumpstering people.
Wow. How do you feel about, like, Ret Paladin's mood?
For me, I don't know. Red Pallies, for sure, they are useful, and it's for sure worth it to bring 1. That's kind of how TBC goes, is there's a lot of, like, essentially every spec is viable because they all bring something to the table. But, I mean, for me, I just play a warrior, so I've never considered playing Ret.
What does Ret provide? Because I don't remember.
Ret is 3% crit for the entire raid, and then 2% damage to the party. Plus, they're keeping judgment up on the boss the whole time, too.
That's true.
Seal the Crusader.
And,
I could be wrong. I think it's called Seal the Crusader.
Okay, let me see.
And the Crusaders try to keep it up all the time. It's nice. They're not that, but they're not that annoying. They don't annoy me as much as Warriors and Rogues do.
Okay. All right.
I don't see this, but I'm sure you're correct. I just don't see the talent you're talking about.
We can talk about melee misconceptions now. Is there anything that comes to mind there? Or we can transition into talking about stats, too, and just maybe quality of life, how easy it is to gear these. This is another implication, too. Like, are you going to have... Is it going to be... Maybe it's easy as hell to gear melee because not that many of them are there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I've never geared one. I'm not sure. I did ask a rogue before, the one who was going to come on earlier, and he said, as a rogue perspective, I said, going from T4, T5, and T6, can you tell me how they are? And he said, T4, they're okay. T5, they're horrible. T6, they're great. T4 is kind of a joke tier in general. Gruul and Hiking Mulgar are decent rogue fights along with Mac Therodon, and you get a lot of rogues get a lot of gear in Karazhan and DSD from Gruul's. T5 is just horrible in general because there's not. I guess I don't know if it counts for all melee, but
I keep hearing that about melee though. That T5 melee suck.
I mean,
Why is
outside of
that?
tier pieces, you'd have way less competition for gear if there's just way less of them, especially if tanks are focusing on tank gear and DPS wants DPS, So definitely would gear up easy. Weapons, probably way less competition. You also have roughly equal loot drops to bosses in vanilla, but with 15 less people, so, loot in general is bigger.
True.
And that is kind of a sleeper thing about melee and TBC. If you care about that sort of thing, like in Classic, there's literally 15 and maybe even 20 warriors in the raid. In TBC, there's 2. So
Yeah, you'll get
the gear is just flowing to you, which is a really nice feeling going from, just being one class of 15 to, you're your own thing. If you do get the limited spot. Which is hard to get.
Yeah.
As a rogue, especially, Cargos, I mean, other than the tier piece, any loot that drops that's for a rogue, maybe the Pharaoh will want it, and other than that, it's yours, right?
There's no kind of sick. So all the tier gear, you get all the tier gear, and you look amazing.
Well, the tier gear is different, remember, because classes share tokens.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That is competed, but anything that isn't tier gear.
Okay. So
I've noticed that some of the quote-unquote meme specs, melee, boomies, Ellies, they seem to be most geared people because, like you said, it is just them that needs it. There's just 2 warriors in there. There's just 1 rogue in there, so they typically end up the most geared and still far behind DPS.
could you tank dungeons as a warrior in raid as Arms or Fury? How do you feel about that? Random question.
Sorry, repeat that.
I was saying, can you tank dungeons as Arms or Fury, or do you get dumpstered?
I'm sure you can. I mean, it depends on the dungeon, and it depends whether it's heroic or not. Fury is definitely better for tanking, I would say, because you just deal more threat, but I mean, for me right now on the server that I play currently, respecs are free, so I'd literally just go prot every time for dungeons, but you kind of are going to want to be prot in my experience. But in Classic TBC, it could be different. I mean, the dungeons probably aren't going to be as hard as, we're used to playing on these servers.
Probably depends on what level of progression you and your group have as far as gear goes, right? Maybe at the beginning when you're first getting to 70 and just starting heroics, no, I probably wouldn't be Arms, but I think later they probably could just fine.
Gear. In Classic, I was literally never prot spec and was able to tank every dungeon, but there are definitely certain dungeons, heroics especially in TBC, that I would not want to tank at all if I'm not prot.
I remember always wanting a prot Pally as my heroic tanks. They were just juicy to have.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go through the raids here. Let's go talk about Karazhan. And then we can move on forward, just light and polite, light touch, broad strokes type thing. Do you think Karazhan and maybe just some of the initial raids, Gruul, Hydra, anything like that? How does it? Do you think melee do okay early, or does it? People hear that they do better in Sunwell, so on and so forth. You always hear that, right? That melee tend to power up later. But curious, maybe if we move raid to raid, how you feel they do?
T4, they say they're not. I mean, damage-wise, it's not going to change, but mechanic-wise, the T4, Gruul's, Mags, and Karazhan is fine with them. Mechanic-wise, they're able to do. That's why in T4, I think they're all right.
I think it's Serpent Shrine and TK where they suffer the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
I heard that you don't even take melee on progression on sometimes. Is that true?
We haven't. We've done that where we don't. Besides the Reptile and the Enhanced Shaman, yeah.
Damn.
But I mean, we've done. I remember us progging on the bosses without a warrior in there. Besides the tank.
So what kind of mechanics are these that makes it so hard for a melee to do damage in TBC?
Just where you can't be boss, man. You got the whirlwind effects, anything in the boss where you have to move out of it real quick, like Leotheris. Alar is a lot of platform boss phase 1 where he goes platform to platform. They're not going to be able to run platform to platform and get there, so they kind of sit down and get the ads that spawn. Solarian is a little more of a range. It's just range is so much easier.
think TBC in general is where they started thinking more about just mechanics and fights and raids,
Yeah.
whereas a lot of vanilla is more or less tank and spank with like slight adjustments.
Right, it's true. They wanted to make the fights more complex. They wanted to add a lot of mechanics. I think they kind of messed up. They were so focused on adding difficult mechanics, but they weren't focused on, kind of balancing the mechanics so that ranged and melee had to play around them. A lot of the times they would just, add a whirlwind effect or an AoE effect without really. I don't think it was their intention to basically to just push out melee DPS and make them way less viable. You would think their intention is to have most classes and playstyles be viable.
It's crazy because I feel like every RPG I play, melee has a disadvantage. Like, I feel like all game designers haven't figured how to balance this yet. I don't know.
Yeah, you said something really big brain, Moot, that I thought that like stuck with me. You were saying maybe devs possibly didn't know how to add in mechanics to engage with the range at the time, or they tried to, basically in TBC they tried to make the raids harder than in Classic, right, and add a bunch more sophistication to them. But their immediate decisions affect melee more than range, and maybe towards the more retail or modern versions of the game, they have all these crazy things that also affect ranged equally. So that's I don't know if you have anything else to say on that, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of just what I was saying. Like, they wanted to make the fights more complex. They wanted to add more mechanics, but they didn't realize, like, the simplest way to add more mechanics are mechanics that do affect melee. And I just don't think that it was their intention to really fuck over melee that hard and have so many mechanics that ranged in a lot of situations don't even really need to play around. I don't think that was their intention. They were just trying to make the fights more difficult, more complicated. But, in later expansion packs, that is something they've addressed more, I think, in the mechanics, more fairly affect ranged and melee.
Gotcha.
But TBC, they were still fresh to the development of WoW in a lot of ways. They were still, figuring out what they wanted to do with raids and mechanics and everything. And it's a huge jump from Classic. I just don't think it was clear to them or their intention that melee would be affected way more than range, and melee would become kind of unviable.
So here's the thing I'm curious about, and I think Crix will probably be pretty polarized. Moot might have a different opinion on this. If it wasn't for all of these melee mechanics messing up, your rotations and stuff like that, if it was pure paper doll, target dummy, all buffs, do you still think Hunter and Warlock would be that much further ahead than melee? Or maybe, it would probably depend on different gear levels as well, but do you have maybe any thoughts on that?
I would say not as far ahead, because you are able to sit there in melee, but still behind, yeah. Because it seems like some of those melee don't scale as well as the casters are in T5.
Okay.
But don't forget, these melees are all great in Arena. Warriors and Rogues are both incredible in Arena. And, unlike in Vanilla, where the end game, like, if you really wanted to go try hard, felt like you pretty much had to raid, or speedrun or whatever. In TBC, Arena sort of offers, like, almost an alternative end game, where it was very respectable for people to get high ratings, and obviously very high skill cap, because it's, based on other people, which is, like, it's limitless, right? So, and Warriors are fantastic in lots of different comps, and Rogues even more so. So, yeah, they're, that's cool.
So not as wide of a spread. Melee would do a bit better. And people say that once melee get full gear, you want to know the best reason to play melee? Warglaves. But let's say you get Warglaves and everything.
Yeah, what the fuck is with all the legendaries for Warriors?
You think Warrior can do more damage than Rogue? With full everything, Moot? Or which melee you think that does the most damage potentially?
That's a hard question. I mean, I would say Warrior, because I think Warrior, just the, rage mechanic and how you scale with crits and how much damage you do affects how much rage you gain. I would say Warrior scales the hardest with gear.
Yeah, I mean, that may make sense. You have the infinite resource, like rage versus energy is kind of fixed, and but it's hard to say. I mean, you're post tier 6 right now, right, Crix?
Yeah. We're waiting for Sunwell.
Waiting for Sunwell. Yeah, I'm curious what's gonna happen. So but right now, post tier 6, everyone. So people have full tier 6 pretty much.
Yeah, a lot of people do. Yeah, everyone's pretty stacked.
Do you see
And the rogue's dumping. The enhancement shaman's dumping on people. The warrior's dumping on people.
who's doing the best?
Rogue
though?
scale extremely good with gear, and they get pry out their T6 over everyone else.
Mm.
And they have no competition because the tokens are shallow. So
in your raid, your rogues are stronger than the warrior.
yeah, and all the fights in Black Temple and Mount Hydra, they're fine with melee. They're not. I mean, Illidan's kind of rough, because of phase 2. But other than that, it's not. It's way more melee friendly than all of T5, which is why you see them pumping as well, because they don't have to run out of shit a bunch of times.
Mm.
It gets to the point where we have to worry about our melee pulling threat now in TBC, in T6 because they're pumping like hard.
What?
And swear to God, there's fights where the warrior pull aggro, and we're like, whoa, I've never heard anybody melee pull aggro, but they're fucking pumping, man. They really are. Like it's night and day. It's like T5. I show 10 on my damage done meters, like 10 for top 10 people. I would never see yellow or brown up there, bro. Rarely ever do I see them up there. And then we entered, halfway through Black Temple, they're pumping hard.
I see. What about on trash and stuff too? I mean, I feel like Rogue probably still has no cleave, right? I mean, they don't have any. So Warriors probably cleave pretty good, huh?
Yeah. Yep. Warriors are fine. I don't know what enhancing them do, but Warriors. I see Warriors on the AOE. The AOE is still not going to do. That's not their shining force. That's just the casters. But you see them doing some damage.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like a 2 to 3 mob pull cleave. Yeah, I think two-hand warrior, arms warrior is insane. Fury warrior is insane. You also have sweeping strikes. Whirlwind hits with both of your weapons in TBC, so that's definitely something that makes Fury a lot better.
Don't forget to rage pooling. None of the other melee DPS can do anything like that, but that can make a huge DPS difference in a fight if you go into it with full rage or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Whirlwind hits with both weapons?
Yeah, it just hits with both your weapons. So if you do want to play Fury, you want a slow main hand and offhand weapon for Whirlwind.
Does it combine them into one yellow hit, or is it 2 separate hits? Because I'm curious how it interacts with sweeping strikes. Like if it was you hit Whirlwind and you see two yellow swings hit it, or does it combine it? I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think it's separate.
Separate? I wonder how it works with sweeping strikes. I mean, that sounds fun. I'm leveling a warrior right now, dude. I'm loving it. It's just so much fun. So much fun. Okay. Let's see here. Maybe we can move into. Oh no, let's finish our thoughts on the raid tier. So tier 4 seems like it's okay. You guys are saying right, Craig? So you still they do okay. There's no mechanics. All right. There's still a melee. There's still a small sun melee. Yeah. Okay. Tier 5. Apparently, this is the dreaded tier for melee. I keep hearing this. What about tier 5 is so garbage for melee?
How about the boss just flying away from you on a LAR, for instance? That makes it kind of hard to hit the boss.
Throwing weapon? Gunshot? No.
Yeah, dude, just whip the gun out.
Whip the old blunderbuss out.
Hydros is about the only melee-friendly fight in SSC.
I was going to say, I remember Bash was
the only one that's melee-friendly in TK.
Is the only one? You said there's only one?
Yeah, I would say, Void Reaver in TK is probably the only time you will see it. You can be a melee and sit there and not move the entire time in Palm. And then Hydros as well. Well, Hydros, you got to move with the boss when he transitions, obviously, but...
So all of TK...
Especially Warriors, because they have the 4 ads, and they can roll in those ads,
Okay, so all of TK, every fight except for one, melee are kind of struggling, because they're moving the whole time, or... Okay.
Alar, worthless, as Moot just said. Solarian's rough, depending on how... I mean, it's server-based with the wrath mechanic she has, but they're always rip on there. KT, you need him anyway, but that's a little rip as well. Void Reaver, they can sit there and the entire fight and not stop.
Okay.
Yeah, and SSC Lurker is probably one of the better fights Melee has from what I've seen from logs, and that still is pretty terrible. Like, Lurker
you still have to move out all the time, yeah.
Exactly. Lurker literally does a whirlwind knockback that only will hit Melee.
Well, it's anybody in melee range every 30, 45 seconds or something like that. It's annoying. And it just knocks you off the platform, so it's super bad. But that is outside of that, you can melee. You can, back up just for real quick and come back in.
But part of playing melee is learning, how to play your class and play it in certain situations. Like, for instance, on Lurker, there's a circular platform. There's an ability Lurker does called Spout. And how you dodge Spout is just by going underneath the water. And the ranged DPS are going to go on the outside of the circle, underneath the water. But as melee DPS, you can go on the inside of the inner circle, underwater, still dodge the spout, and still be in melee range. DPSing Lurker. So as melee, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you. You're going to have to learn the exact strategy of how to play melee, like in accordance to these different mechanics. And there's also something cool you can do as a warrior, because there are, like little fish, little piranha that spawn on Lurker fight. You can get enraged procs off of taking damage from fish. And,
That depends on that. That'll depend on the patch, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because depending on the patch, because you actually clear the platforms that bullet.
Is it so? SSC? How is SSC? Does SSC have a lot of melee friendly fights?
No, not really. I would have to say Lurker is the best one, like he said. Oh, Hydra's probably the best one, second last boss.
Oh, and Vash.
Fathom Lord doesn't seem that bad.
Vash is impossible for melee.
No, Vash. You need him on there. They're not bad on there. It's not as good as the range, obviously, but you need them on there to handle elementals, tainted cores, and stuff like that. Fathom Lord's rip. You actually, you know what? On Tidewalker melee can sit. I think they're pumping the whole time, right?
They have He has Earthquake, doesn't he?
Earthquake. No, the Earthquake knocks everybody down, but that's when he summons some Murlocs, and then but melee can. I think on Tidewalker they're free to pump.
Great.
Okay.
They're free to pump on.
I guess we'll find out what happens.
So SSC,
I expect some melees to pump.
Seems pretty decent. I mean, it's kind of cool if you're able to be useful on the final boss of a raid, like just even flavor wise. That's pretty sick that you can have impact on the final boss of a tier, as opposed to, you're saying on Illidan, for example, that melee really struggle on Illidan, and we can get into that next with Black Temple. How is Black Temple for melee? And he fights.
Let's see. Give me a second.
Pulling up the old logger.
Nash seems fine. Suprema seems fine. Akama seems fine. I don't know what's one that's really. Illidan is rough because of phase 2 with the elementals, but you can tank them in a certain way to where the melee can hit him. It's just kind of sketch.
Just be a Tarn.
During Shadow phase, melee has to run pretty far out, so they have room for the casters to be up there and seed. I would say Illidan is probably the worst one for melee in Black Temple, but it's not that bad. I mean, they're still able to pump. Also, you front Mount Hydra, which is T6 as well, which I think melee is fine on that one, too.
Remind me of the Archimon mechanics. Is there anything anti-melee in that?
The second phase is a 2 big-ass fire elementals you gotta fight, and there's fire everywhere. It's where melee can't really get. There's fire cutting off the... and you can't put them in front because they'll cleave down. But you can kite... I haven't seen our regulars do it, but you can kite them out. Oh, Council... Council's not that bad for melee. Council's actually... That's the one fight in TBC that's horrible for ranged. Which we can get to next week. But yeah, Council's... It's not as good, but it's not as bad. I'd probably say Illidan's the worst.
Okay.
But you still got him there.
All right.
You need him there.
Anything on BT Mood, or you pretty much agree with what he's saying?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, yeah, Illidan seems rough. I mean, it's just a question of, finding what fights you can have an impact on and learning how to play around certain mechanics, whether, you're a warrior and you're intercepting, intervening to dodge certain mechanics. Maybe if you're playing a rogue, Cloak of Shadows is going to help you situationally. Like, you gotta learn how you can be viable.
That's true. I forgot. Like, well-timed cloak, you might be able to get around certain mechanics and things like that. So you really just have to be better. Be better if you want to do melee and be good.
Be better.
Just min-max as much as you can if you want to be a melee man. You can be a melee, so you got to min-max as much as you can, or be smart. I have people from my guild reaching out to me way ahead of time, like, "Yo, I want to be your rogue, or I want to be your warrior." Be smart and call that out if you want one ahead of time.
Call it out early, right now, guys.
Yeah, bro. Hey, TBC's out in a year. I'm dibsing that rogue spot.
2 slots in the raid. Call it out right now. 1 year in advance. Not even announced yet. Chat.
That is actually how that works, dude. That's how those spots get filled.
Shot first Warglaive. That's it, right there.
I will say that rogues are. There's been times where, like in T5, we didn't have a rogue, and there's been times where we've wiped the bosses having interrupt issues. Yes, I know other people can interrupt, but the rogue is just so fucking good at interrupting and being able to do it so much. Like Mac Therodon, for instance. Progging Mac Therodon without a rogue kind of sucks because they're so good at kicking. And then you have to
bring one rogue just to get arena gear.
All right, well, let's talk about Sunworld, and we'll be done with this section of it. Apparently, allegedly, melee slaps in Sunwell. I don't exactly know why. I never cleared Sunwell myself, but this is what I hear. You guys hear anything similar? Or?
Melee friendly, and they scale. All of them scale to gear. It's just them needing the gear to do it in T6, and that's when they get it.
Okay.
And they pump, no?
Yeah, for sure. This is when the gear starts getting really, really good for melee. Like, early on, expertise isn't easy to itemize, but at this point in the game, you're going to be getting tons of gear that has tons of expertise, but also tons of other really good stats. So it's just free to itemize expertise.
And there's a perfect.
You need expertise, and T4 Previous has I think one piece of expertise they can get, and then one from Classic they can wear as well. And then they start getting more expertise as time goes by, which thus obviously makes them be better. And T6 is full of everything with the expertise rating on it.
Okay. Interesting. So I mean, that first of all, that's kind of nice. Like, put yourself in the eyes of a melee. Like, they can expect a power level increase the later we get into the expansion. They can always be looking forward to something throughout the life cycle of a TBC server. Like, oh, one day, come Sunwell, I'll have the gear and I'll keep up with you, stupid warlock, stupid caster, and they'll be able to, as opposed to getting weaker with time. I.e., pretty much a hunter, in some sense in Classic, right? Just because your pets don't scale or something like that. It kind of feels bad to think that you're going to be at your strongest early in a server as opposed to later. Anyway, relative to the other classes. So let's move into stats for Melee. You mentioned expertise. Maybe you could go into that a little bit, and maybe also haste. This is another stat that interacts with Melee in an interesting way. What do you think about that, Moon?
Yeah, we've brought up expertise a few times. Obviously, expertise is the stat that lowers your chance to be parried or dodged. So, I mean, it is essentially increasing the amount of good hits that you have on your hit table, reducing bad hits. If you get a dodge, on your execute or your mortal strike, that's one of the worst feelings. But kind of what I was talking about just a second ago is that expertise early on in TBC is very, very limited and can kind of be a trap that is not really worth itemizing, because early on you're not going to be having that much crit, that much attack power on your gear. And if you're sacrificing even more crit and attack power for expertise, it's actually just not going to be worth it. Like, the itemization that early in the game just isn't set up to even be really close to expertise cap, and it's not worth giving up on an item that's giving you a ton of strength and a ton of crit. Like, the best expertise items is an item that's going to give you some expertise, but it's also going to give you the other stats that you really want as a warrior, which is strength, crit, agility. A really good example of this is pretty much literally every melee DPS is using this item. It's from a quest chain in Blade's Edge Mountains. It's the Clefthoof hide leggings, the Chad dress. It's actually a leather dress. And
Chad dress?
It is a dress, yeah. And literally every melee DPS right now on the server I play is using it.
What? That sounds like a massive downside to playing melee. You have to wear a dress?
You're gonna have to wear a dress for multiple raid tiers.
Alright, I'm out. Stream's over, dude. Oh, never mind. Wait, hold on. What is this dress called? Let me look this up. Shoot, you said Clefthoof dress? Clefthoof. Is it Clefthoof leggings?
I can't remember the exact name. Clefthoof hide leggings.
Oh, I see it. That's a dress, alright. It's even got chains on it. There you go, folks.
Isn't that for Druids?
If you didn't already have a reason to roll a
wear that
female
unless
character, there you
profession.
go. Kilt, okay.
Sure, you want to call it a kilt,
like
call it a dress, but you're gonna be wearing that shit through tier 5. If you look at, one of the best DPS warriors on the server, which we are gonna look at, he is in